Hello, nice to see you all. Well, thank you all for inviting me and having me. Some of you have met me before, many years ago. I think that was 2001, perhaps. And I came to Japan to talk about the different problems with the Unification Church around the world. I feel very privileged to be here among the lawyers for spiritual sales, because I know that you've been working very hard towards putting an end to the type of behavior that goes along with the second gen and the Unification Church and families. First, I'd like to speak briefly about myself for those of you who are new to this, or if I don't know how many second gen are watching this. Perhaps some of you know of me or have seen things, but I came out publicly when Nancy wrote her book, Under the Shadow of the Moons, and I was asked by her, through her Brosdale, to talk about the true family or Moon's family, and to validate that what she was saying was true about the abuse that she had dealt with during her time being married to Moon's eldest son at the time, who's since passed away. I think at the time, thank you so much. At the time, I think people sincerely believed, myself among others, that the book, Under the Shadow of the Moons, would make people leave the church, just simply because of the stories about the family, which were true. And everybody knew that Nancy was being beaten, physically abused by her husband, and that he was on drugs, and that Mrs. Moon was funding his drug habit at about $40,000 a month or more for cocaine, and continual spending that has nothing to do with helping anyone in the world or building any sort of church or kingdom that's worth having. Yeah, so, I mean, amongst his children, there's 4 or 5 that have died, I think all males, but one female was born disabled and died at birth. And let me just speak to the fact that as a second gen and the eldest of the second gen, except for the Koreans, I was brought up in England by my father to believe that I should serve the world and serve the true family and be honorable about that and sincere. And I was, growing up, very much a true believer. I even tried to convince my grandparents that I was very concerned that they might die and not believe Moon was the Messiah. The system that we have been subjected to as second gen in the West, and that includes Japan and other countries, again, with the exception of the elite Koreans, which are the 36 best couples that were around Moon and a number of others, we had no idea that Moon had sexual relations with numerous women, no idea that this was about making money for just his family and his friends. We were completely sort of naive, and we were brought up very strictly. We didn't have a lot to do with the outside world because we were told, how dangerous that was. I also had a personal relationship with Moon, which was unusual. I watched movies with him on my own. I've sat with him on his lap since a little girl, gone on boats, and he was always very polite. Well, not polite, but kind, somewhat kind to me. I mean, he did yell at me a number of times, had me in tears and different things. When he was kind to me, it put a target on my back for other parents and families to hate me from a little girl, because everyone wants to be first with him. And, it wasn't something that I particularly wanted. It was partly because he knew my mum very well, and my parents were significant leaders, both of them, one's an opera singer. My mum was a fabulous musician, singer, artist. My dad is a learned man, and both of them were, totally used. In fact, all of the 43 couples, so after the 36, which is the Koreans, there's 43 couples between America and the Western countries and any other countries. And in that group, the Europeans and the people that my parents brought in. Once the Koreans started to realize the sort of assets that were brought in Europe, castles and large houses in the country, training centers, printing. My dad and mum had connections. My mum met the Queen because Moon wanted that, knew the mayor, they were anti and so there was a tremendous pressure on the Westerners, but none of them knew what was coming, nor did, I think, many of the Japanese. Perhaps some of the founding members in Japan knew more than we did, like as in the West, but the treatment has been extremely cruel to anyone that wasn't Korean, and that includes all of the Western countries, the mixed race, black, and certainly Japan has been a massive target for the Koreans. And I was just thinking to add that one of the most distressing things was when basically my parents' generation and the younger ones, that was the blessing of 777 and so on and so forth, they were eventually used, till their 40s or 50s, and then told to go home, to go do home church. And then they realized they don't have enough membership, so they brought back the second gen by saying that blessed children have to be re-blessed, which theoretically is ridiculous, because if you're born without sin, why would you need another blessing? But of course, this is the beginning of them milking money from the families that they have already bankrupted around the world. I'd like to introduce Sam now to comment on some of the things I've said. I don't know if we have time, we can perhaps take one or two questions. I don't know that we will. I just want to comment that there's so much more to be said on this, including the psychological side, and the fact that you can see very clearly that the Japanese were manipulated, particularly cruelly because of the war and because the Koreans hated them. But they also brought them on side and said, you're Asian like us, you're not like the whites, and certainly not like the blacks, because they're the lowest in the Korean totem pole. And so I'm going to hand over to Sam to comment on the Koreans and his father and so on.
Yes. I'd like to add to what Donna was saying regarding how the church exploited the membership, and in particular the Japanese membership. Like when she referred to the blessing, it's common knowledge that when they wanted to raise funds, they would hold a blessing because it brought in so much capital. So much of what they did operated around the acquisition and the accumulation of money. I looked at the Unification Church as a spiritual racketeering organization, like a mafia, with the Moon family, my father's family, at the very top, and then beneath it you have other families, the 36 couple, and then beneath that a lower level of families. And there was this structure which catered and served my father's family. And like every organization, because my father accumulated money by demanding tithing, by demanding fundraising from the members, that whole pattern of behavior trickled down to the other families, or the elite families like the 36 couple. In other words, this pattern of abusing people, this pattern of racketeering, this pattern of forcing people to fundraise, to give up everything, whichever way they could, to bring in money, was a way of life. And so it was perpetuated through the 36 couples and everybody else down through them. The church came to the West. A lot of what the church did in terms of its sexual practices were kept hidden from everyone. So like Donna and her family, and most everybody in the West, they did not know about Pikabu, the quote, cleansing of the womb by sexual intercourse that my father actively participated in throughout his quote.
So you're talking about the fact that Moon slept with all of the 36 blessed couples' wives.
Yes. What happened, and this was written about before, but my father, he slept with all the wives of the 36 couples who are the elite Unification Church families. And the husbands, they actually participated in a similar type of practice where they were able to choose among 3 different women to sleep with. It's a strange, perverted practice, but this is something that they actively participated in. But the psychological effect was quite damaging. I brought up that practice because what happened was it created an environment where the 36 couple elite were able to blackmail my father, and they were able to, in a sense, blackmail each other because they all had this secret amongst themselves. And because of the secret, it was an incredible device to control everyone that was under him at the elite level. And in regards to my mother's family, it was also used as well. When my mother was 17, she was raped by my father. And when that happened, he told my mother not to tell her mother. So there's this pattern of sexual exploitation, sexual aggression, and it's used as a form of blackmail and control and shame. And so that's what happened. The reason why I bring this up is because this goes to the heart of how twisted and how perverted and how evil the Unification Church is, and how they kept these type of practice hidden from everybody who was in the West primarily. So Donna's family, including Japan, Donna's family, everybody in the West had no inkling that this type of behavior was going on.
They thought they were joining a Christian church. And many times it wasn't very clear whether or not they were really saying that Moon was the Messiah in the beginning, although that's where they concluded in the end. But if we speak to the issues, the practices in the church became increasingly dark and shamanistic, and the attacks on women increased, the abuse increased, and the pressure increased. And as Sam said already, it was all about money.
One last thing is, because of those practices, it's important to understand that the church tries to present itself as somehow being Christian. It tries to present itself as somehow being an organization that is trying to cause positive change in the world. All of it, charity, all those things are a lie, a complete fabrication. They are not Christian because of their sexual perverted practices. They do not love people. They are not charitable people. They abuse people. They exploit people. They are, in many ways, an evil organization that needs to be stopped. And I understand, because of what happened in Japan, Japan understands the consequences of an organization that's left to its own devices. It can create national tragedies. The church has exploited many people around the world, and this is something that needs to be addressed in a very significant way.
We're in our 50s, the third generation are also being used, and they start fundraising with them as well. Obviously, I've been involved for a long time in trying to get the word out and to help the second gen and first gen come to terms with the reality of this organization. And I would like to share more about my life. There are photos and things we've written. I don't know if you'll have a chance to see them now, but perhaps they can be handed out or given out later. And perhaps at a different date, we can talk more about our experiences for the other SGAs out there. Please do not lose hope.
It's important because this is an SGA conference. It's important that all SGAs understand, as you very well know, that we have all been traumatized and exploited by the Unification Church.
Many of us lost our parents and friends.
Many of us have lost so many things, and it's important that we find the courage to understand what happened to us, and that we say enough is enough, and that we unite and band together, because it's only when we come together and acknowledge what happened and have our strength with each other that we're able to heal from this and move forward. We have to look at the trauma that we all experience. We need to heal ourselves and work diligently for our own personal recovery. I'm 56 years old, and I have many, many more things and many more years left for me to discover all the damage that I've had to suffer as a result of my life, and I am not alone. And I just want to encourage everyone there, do not stop looking at the trauma. Do not stop working towards healing yourself. It's very important, because if we're able to claim our life back, we have to look at the things that happened to us and work through them.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the lawyers, because in the West we have not had the support that we need from legal side. There was a few people. So thank you all very much, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Mrs. Yamamoto, for your wonderful translation.
Thank you.